I'm Robert Wadlow, 12 years old, and I weigh 240 pounds, and I'm about 7 feet tall. These boys grouped around me are about the same age as I am. They go to the same grade.
The giant of Illinois died from a blister on his toe after walking all day through the first.
I think that the whole story of Robert is absolutely phenomenal, because even when he died, he was still teaching us lessons. And one of his favorite phrases was, "Stand tall and be the best you can be." And he certainly did that throughout his life.
Wadlow's always been a fabric of the community of Alton since his birth, really. People have loved him and adored him, got to know him quite well, and even after his death, I was some 30, 40 years after he died, was born, and when we would always go to his gravesite as kids, we'd always be here got to come to the statue unveiling in the 80s. And, since that time, the story continues, the saga continues. I meet with people throughout the world about this place in Alton, and they're all enamored about the story of Robert Wadlow. They love to hear how he lived, what trials and tribulations he had to deal with his disability of height, and just the uniqueness of his size.
From all the records that I have read, that he was normal height and weight for a baby. And it was after he got older and started moving around that he started having his extraordinary growth spurts. He was 5'1", and the teacher said that he did very well academically in school, but the other students would stop and stare at him, and the teachers would stop and gawk at him. And of course the chairs and desks and that were all too small for him. So he had to kind of squeeze himself in. He always had to sit at the back of the room because he was on a vision for any of the students behind him.
Okay. Well, he couldn't have his lunch and sit down. He had to stand up to eat his lunch because he had sat down once before and it broke. So they made him stand up to eat his lunch, and I'd feel so sorry for him. And then he couldn't go up the steps like an ordinary thing. He had to go sideways because his feet wouldn't fit on the little step place. And at the end of this season of school year, they'd have a picnic, and Robert would look to go fish. We had to pay, I think it was a nickel to go fish, and he would tell the lady that was putting the prize on that he didn't want that one. And finally she said, "Robert, you have to stand back now," because he could look right over and see what he was going to get. I remember his helping push a boy on a sled, and he fell down and split his britches open, and he went home crying because he had his pants broken open. And we had people coming, and I know the first American Indian I saw was there at school when they came and to see Robert. And then we had Eskimos came and see Robert, and the strange things was when you seen the midgets up beside Robert. but he was always kind to everyone. He never complained or fussed about having to go outside and meet people. He was, we went about the 6th grade, I guess we went to Alton High, and I remember seeing him carrying his sister's violin case home, and it looked so little upside Robert carrying it. But he was very kind and good. Of course, everyone called him the Gentle Giant, and that was the true name for him because he was very kind. Everyone treated him great. I don't remember anyone that wasn't good to him. He just was that way. Of course, I was quite tall, and most of the girls made fun of me.
So he decided to go to Shirtlift, and because it was close and be by his family and that. And so he practically just got home, turned around and started school that spring semester in January up there. Again, he enjoyed school a great deal. German still was his favorite class. But by this time, he was falling so much, and the steps were so treacherous for him with all the ice and snow. And it took him so long to get from point A to point B that he really began wondering if this is what he should be doing at that time. There was a lot of offers coming in at that time for him to go around with the shoe companies and promote their shoes because they were so kind about the shoes they made for him. And so he decided to go in that route. He decided to have his father go with him, and they would send him all over the place, and he really enjoyed it. Up to this time, he had decided that he wanted to be a lawyer. That's what he was planning for when he was going to Shirtlift. But afterwards, and he started doing this, he thought, well, maybe I should be in advertising for shoe companies. And he started touring the country with his father. He had many wonderful experiences. One of the games that they would play is they would put a coin up on the top of his head, a silver dollar, and then they'd have kids try to reach up there, so then they get to keep the silver dollar. And he would bend down and then make sure that they got their silver dollar. He loved children. He also had some unfortunate experiences where he would get kicked in the legs a lot to see if he was on stilts. They would also come up and pull up his pant leg to make sure his legs were there. And that irritated him. I think as much as he was afraid he was going to fall as anything else. Because he'd always tell his mother, they're just curious, Mom. They don't mean any harm. And so he traveled around, and then eventually, we're going now, he's up to 22, he had an invitation to go up to Manistee, Michigan, to go for the Manistee National Forest celebration, which was on the 4th of July. Before he left, there was a blister forming on his foot. He had to wear a brace to help. He had so little feeling in his legs and feet that they had braces there to help keep him so his ankle wouldn't turn out on him. And they thought that since he was going up on one of these trips, they didn't think he was going to be walking that much. So they thought it was okay for him just to go. He had been on antibiotics. And he got up there, and he kept saying, he got into the parade, and he kept saying, I don't feel well, I don't feel well. So his dad really took a look at him and felt him, and he was burning up with fever. He had to leave the parade, go sit in a car. He had to sit there in the car all scrunched up for several hours till the parade was done and the people the crowd had dissipated. And they took him back to the hotel that they were staying in. A doctor was called in. He decided it was too dangerous for Robert to leave. And so word came back from Alton that he was very ill. And the Telegraph tried to give a real upbeat news to the community because everyone here was worried about him. But the reality was that he was just going downhill steadily. Again, his temperature was 106. They were feeding him through a tube. and he was just sleeping most of the time. After a couple of days, his dad called Robert's mom and said, "You need to come up." So he brought brought Harold Jr., his little brother, and Mom came up. Harold Jr. said that the mood in the room was always somber, that Robert wasn't talking, and it was just they kept the room kind of dark and quiet as they could. The day before Robert died, they did an small operation on his leg, and they decided that, they were doing the best they could with the antibiotics, and he died. That night, he had been asking if he was going to be able to come home to go to his grandparents' 50th anniversary party. The grandparents were coming up from Florida, and Robert loved to see them, and he loved parties, loved being around his family. And the doctor told him then, he said, "I don't think you're going to get well enough in time for you to go down there." And he died then early in the morning on July 15th, 1940.
It was a shock when we heard that he had passed away. Just remember getting, we got the newspapers with the telling about what had happened to him. And of course I went to his, when we could go, and we were, I think, 23 when he passed away. He said they wore the carpets out because we stood outside in long lines to go. I think we all admire what he was like, because he was not a bully or anything like that. He was just, I know he wanted to do everything anyone else did. That was obvious that he wasn't unkind because he couldn't do what he would have liked to do.
After walking all day through the first winter snow.
So Harold, his dad, contacted his brother Casper in Nebraska, and he had a funeral home there, and asked him what they could do. Well, his brother knew of a place in Michigan who did odd-sized caskets, metal. So his brother contacted them, and then went over there, and he and an employee of his put the casket together and got it ready for Robert. Streeper then left here and made the trip up there and brought Robert back to Alton. It was early in the morning when he got back, 5-something in the morning, and so he backed the car into the back of the funeral home. They had gathered some men from the Upper Alton, and they put straps around his caskets, and they carried the casket along the outside of the building and went into the front. It was very easy to get in the front because it's a double-wide door. However, when they started going down the very narrow hallway to go back to the anteroom by a chapel where they were going to have Robert lie in state, they couldn't make the turn to go in there. The doorway was not wide enough for the casket. So they had to bring the casket back out to the vestibule. They got a carpenter to come in and widen the door, and he did not finish it off until he was sure that the casket could go in and come out easily. And he finished it then the morning of the visitation. The people started coming, and the crowd started gathering very quickly. The funeral home was open for 2 days, 24 hours a day. People were coming through 4 deep at a time, and it was continuously going through there. They said outside that there were license plates from all over the country. It wasn't just local people who had come to pay their respects to Robert. People here who knew Robert, who went through the line, said that he looked very peaceful and at rest. And that's what they have put on his tombstone out at Upper Alton Cemetery. When it got to be the day of the funeral, early in the morning, about 5 in the morning, Robert's parents, his brothers and sister, came up to the funeral home. I mentioned grandparents were there too. The family had their alone time with Robert to say their goodbyes. They were in there for 2 hours. They left, and then they started the people coming through again. And they finally had to cut it off a little after 10. And before the service began, Robert had belonged to the Main Street Methodist Church. And he had gone and gotten donations for a new pipe organ for his church as he traveled across the country. And a lady came in and opened the doors to the church. And for 15 minutes before the service began, she played on the organ as loud as it could go so people could hear the organ playing. The minister from Main Street Methodist conducted the service, and then the Masons and Demolays from the Franklin Lodge were there because that's where Robert had been a member. So then they had this. Okay, so then at the end of the service, they were going to go and take the casket out to the hearse. And they had 14 or 16 people having to help carry the casket. Robert weighed 491 pounds when he died, plus you add that, it was double that for the casket and on top of that. So it was like 1,000 pounds that these men were carrying. And they had to get police out there to help separate the crowd because everybody wanted to get as close as they could. And so they really had a hard time getting through the crowd to get to the hearse. And when they got there, the casket wouldn't go in. It was too large. So they had to back up, and they had to take the doors off the back of the hearse and slide his casket in. They used ropes and tied them to strategic points inside the hearse so the casket wouldn't, if they hit a bump, wouldn't bounce out. As they went up to Upper Alton Cemetery, one of the Streeter brothers was walking behind, and he remarked about how quiet the crowd was. You would hear people crying softly, but no one was talking. Everyone was showing a great deal of respect and reverence to Robert and to his memory, as he was our neighbor here in town. They got out to the cemetery. There was already 5,000 people there. Police were having to do crowd control. They finally got the hearse back to where the gravesite was. There was a cement truck just sitting right there. Robert Growell, who did many photographs that we still have today of Mr. Wadlow, said it was just so strange to see a cement truck sitting very close to where they were burying Robert. But his parents had requested, because there were rumors going around that someone was going to come in and try to take his body for experimental purposes. They lowered the casket into the grave. They put the lid on, then they put the concrete, covered it completely in concrete, and they put the dirt back on. When they got doing the dirt, they realized that they had not dug the grave deep enough, because with the concrete, it raised you could still see the outline of where the concrete and the casket are in his grave, because it's up higher than the rest of the graves around him. After the service was done, Robert's parents went back to their house. They were now living on Sanford, and they began taking Robert's things out and burning them. They were so afraid that people were going to be disrespectful and unkind to Robert's memory. They would be calling him a freak. And instead of respecting him and understanding what a marvelous young man he was, how he had come over great adversity and still conducted his life with a great deal of self-respect.
Robert Wadlow was indeed a gentle giant. Despite all of the challenges and maybe the awkwardness of his size and the pointing and staring that people had just because of his sheer height, he was very gentle, calm-mannered, a friend to anyone that approached him. So he's a real gentleman, and he was a real, true ambassador for this town. Still is to this day. People love to hear about it. There's even a children's book written about the diversity that he had to go through in growing up, and that's one that is a great seller down at the Visitor Center. People love the Robert Wadlow story, and then that angle of diversity and how he dealt with it, and in such a kind-mannered, gentle way. Wadlow is a huge draw for our area. Like I said, every hour you're here, every day you're here, people are coming to this place. Just about 5 or 6 times a day, people will come into the Alton Visitor Center and ask for directions to this place. So his legacy is really the continuation of that story. And from an economic impact, it's all about tourism. It's about bringing in those new dollars to our area. He's a big piece of our tourism story. You get him and the Piasaw bird together, and you've got yourself a great story. But our saga and destination goes on much, much more than that.
What do you like about Robert?
Well, maybe he's like my dad, and he's really tall, and maybe if he played like basketball, then he'd be really good, and maybe he can dunk. He was a tall man, and he was a nice man.
Walking all day through the first winter snow. Throwing bits of stale bread to the last speckled doves. He never even felt his shoe full of blood. Delirious with pain, his bedroom walls began to glow, and he felt himself soaring up through falling snow, and the sky was a woman's arms. The sky was a woman's arms. A boy with a club foot had sat next to